George Russell did everything a driver can do to win in Canada. Sprint pole, sprint victory, Grand Prix pole, race lead. And then, on lap 30, his Mercedes went completely dead. No electronics, no brakes, no victory, no explanation that could make the pain smaller. But the scandal did not stop there. Because after Russell lost a race he was controlling, the FIA investigated him for a frustrated gesture near the abandonment area, and Mercedes watched Kimi Antonelli inherit the win, stretch the championship gap to 43 points, and walk away looking untouchable. That is why this was not just a mechanical failure. This was the moment Russell's patience finally looked broken. Because he was not beaten by Antonelli on track. He was not beaten by pressure. He was not beaten by a mistake. He was beaten by failure, timing, and then punished by scrutiny. And when a driver says he has nothing left to lose, that is not surrender. That is a warning. Mercedes may have the fastest car in Formula One, but Canada exposed something much more dangerous. A championship leader protected by momentum. A teammate who believes victory was stolen from him. A team boss trying to stop the fire. And a driver who may now be ready to fight Mercedes, the FIA, and the entire story being written against him. Subscribe to the channel. Canada was supposed to be Russell's reset. Not a small recovery. Not a quiet reminder. A reset. The kind of weekend that changes the temperature inside a garage, because suddenly, the driver who looked like he was slipping away from the championship is standing at the front again, controlling the story with his hands on the wheel. And for most of the weekend, that is exactly what George Russell did. He did not arrive in Montreal looking defeated. He did not drive like a man accepting that Kimi Antonelli had already taken command of Mercedes. He drove like a man trying to tear the season open again. That matters, because before the failure, before the investigation, before the reprimand, before the anger, Russell had built something powerful. Proof. In Formula One, proof is everything. A driver can say he still believes. He can say the pace is there. He can say the championship is long. He can sit in front of cameras, choose the right words, and pretend the pressure is not eating into every weekend. But none of that matters like lap time. Lap time is truth. And in Canada, Russell had the lap time. He took sprint pole. He won the sprint. He took pole for the Grand Prix. Then he led the race. Not by accident. Not through chaos. Not because others made mistakes. He was there because he earned it. That is why the collapse cut so deeply. Because this was not a driver searching for excuses after being beaten. This was a driver who had placed himself exactly where a champion needs to be, then watched the entire weekend get ripped away by something outside his control. And that is where the revolt begins. Not with shouting. Not with a dramatic statement. Not with Russell standing in the paddock and declaring war. It begins in a quieter place. In the moment a driver realizes that doing everything right still may not be enough. That is a dangerous realization. Because elite drivers are built on control. They spend their entire lives believing that if they are faster, cleaner, braver, smarter, they can bend the result toward themselves. They believe the work will show. They believe the lap will count. They believe the race will reward the driver who executes under pressure. But Canada broke that belief for Russell, or at least cracked it open. He had the car. He had the track position. He had the rhythm. He had Antonelli behind him. And then, on lap 30, the Mercedes shut down. Everything went dark in the worst possible way. No electronics. No brakes. No way to fight. No way to save the moment. Imagine being in that cockpit. You are leading a Grand Prix. Your teammate, the man ahead of you in the championship, is behind you. Every corner matters. Every braking zone is a statement. Every lap is another reminder to the garage that you are still here, still dangerous, still refusing to be pushed into the background. Then the car stops responding. Not slowly. Not gently. It just dies. A racing driver can recover from oversteer. He can catch a slide. He can adjust brake balance. He can manage worn tires. He can protect a weak battery. He can fight dirty air, pressure, heat, and fear. But he cannot race a dead car. That is the helplessness that makes Canada different. Russell did not lose a battle. The battle was taken away before it could finish. And that is brutal, because the unfinished fight always hurts more than the clean defeat. If Antonelli had passed him on track, Russell would have hated it, but he would have had an answer to chase. He could study the move. He could identify the weakness. He could promise himself it would not happen again. But a failure while leading gives a driver no clean lesson. It only leaves questions. Why now? Why this race? Why when everything was finally working? Why when the championship needed this exact response? Those questions do not disappear when the car is pushed away. They follow the driver. They follow him into the garage. They sit with him during the debrief. They return when he looks at the standings and sees the gap growing instead of shrinking. And in Canada, the timing made it worse. Because Antonelli did not just gain a few points. He inherited the victory. That is the part that makes the story so psychologically damaging. Russell's teammate did not merely benefit from a small mistake. He became the winner of the race Russell was leading. He turned Russell's worst moment into his own championship strength. That does not make Antonelli guilty. It makes the situation poisonous. Because Formula One teammates can be respectful in public, but inside, they both understand what a moment like that means. Antonelli knows the win gave him more control. Russell knows the win should at least have been fought for until the end. And Mercedes knows both truths are now living in the same garage. The result says Antonelli won. The context says Russell was leading. The points say Antonelli is pulling away. The performance says Russell is not finished. That contradiction is the spark. Because Mercedes cannot simply celebrate Canada without feeling the cost. Yes, the team won. Yes, Antonelli extended his lead. Yes, the W17 looked like the strongest car of the weekend. But the driver who may have needed that win most was the one standing beside a broken machine. And when Russell spoke afterward, he did not sound like a man trying to dress the pain up nicely. He sounded exhausted by the pattern. He pointed to earlier moments in the season, when things had already seemed to turn against him. The safety car in Japan. The failure in qualifying in China. And now, Canada, where the car failed while he was leading. That is the language of accumulation. One unlucky race can be swallowed. Two can be explained. But when the setbacks begin to form a pattern in the mind of a driver, the emotion changes. It stops feeling like bad luck. It starts feeling like the season itself is resisting him. That is why his words were so important. When Russell said it felt like the gods did not want him in the fight, that was not just disappointment. That was a driver trying to put a name to something that feels unfair, but cannot be appealed. You cannot argue with fate. You cannot demand a penalty against bad timing. You cannot take a mechanical failure to the stewards and ask for your victory back. And maybe that is what made the FIA investigation feel so explosive. Because after everything Russell had lost, the story did not end with sympathy. It moved to scrutiny. The governing body looked at his frustrated gesture after the retirement. The result was a warning and a formal reprimand, with no championship points penalty. On paper, that sounds controlled. It sounds procedural. It sounds like the kind of thing Formula One handles all the time. But emotion does not live on paper. From Russell's side, the order of events must have felt almost impossible to accept. Lead the race. Lose the car. Lose the win. Watch your teammate inherit the result. Fall further behind in the championship. Then get investigated for showing frustration. That is where a driver can begin to feel cornered. Not just beaten. Cornered. And a cornered driver is a very different thing from a disappointed driver. A disappointed driver says, "We will come back stronger." A cornered driver starts asking harder questions. Why did the system fail me? Why am I the one being examined now? Why is my reaction being judged more visibly than the failure that put me here? Why should I keep absorbing this quietly? That is the emotional engine of this story. Because Russell's revolt is not necessarily a rebellion with one clear enemy. It is not simply against Mercedes. It is not simply against the FIA. It is against the feeling that he can execute perfectly and still be left powerless. Powerlessness is poison for a racing driver. These are people trained to believe that control is everything. They control braking points to the meter. They control tire temperature. They control energy deployment. They control aggression, risk, patience, and fear. Then one failure reminds them how little they actually control. And if that failure is followed by an investigation, the frustration becomes sharper. Because now the driver is not only powerless over the machine. He is also answerable for the emotion that came after the machine failed him. That is a very difficult message to swallow. Mercedes now has to deal with the consequences of that feeling. Not just the technical consequences. Those are obvious. The team has to understand what failed, why it failed, and how to stop it happening again. A leading car dying on lap 30 is not a small problem. It is the kind of reliability failure that can change a championship. But the technical side may be easier than the human side. Because parts can be replaced. Trust is harder. Russell needs to believe that Mercedes can give him a car capable of finishing the job. Not capable of leading for 29 laps. Not capable of taking pole and then disappearing. Capable of surviving the exact moment when the championship needs it most. And after Canada, that belief cannot simply be assumed. It has to be rebuilt. That is the uncomfortable truth for Toto Wolff. He is not managing an ordinary driver reaction. He is managing a driver who has evidence that he was fast enough to win, evidence that he did not throw it away, and evidence that the result still moved against him in the most painful way possible. You cannot calm that with a slogan. You cannot fix that with one interview. You cannot ask Russell to be patient forever, especially when the championship gap is widening and Antonelli is becoming stronger every week. Because while Russell is trying to process being robbed of a win, Antonelli is becoming the statistical center of the team. He has the points. He has the victories. He has the momentum. And in Formula One, momentum changes behavior. It changes how questions are asked. It changes how strategy is discussed. It changes who people look at first when the team talks about the championship. That is not always intentional. It is gravity. The championship leader pulls the room toward him. Russell knows that. Every experienced driver knows that. And that is why Canada was more than a lost race. It was a lost chance to reverse the gravity. A win in Canada would have changed the emotional direction of Mercedes. It would have reminded everyone that Antonelli could be beaten. It would have cut the points gap, changed the headlines, and made the next race feel like the beginning of a real fight back. Instead, the opposite happened. Antonelli won again. Russell left with nothing. And the official story added a reprimand beside his name. That is how a driver begins to harden. Not because he wants drama. Because the normal way of handling disappointment no longer feels enough. Russell can still speak professionally. He can still respect the team. He can still understand that the marshals and officials have rules to enforce. But inside, something changes when the same driver who did everything right is the one left explaining the consequences. That is why the phrase, "nothing to lose," matters so much. When Russell said the pressure was gone and that he had nothing to lose, it sounded almost calm. But underneath it, those words carry danger. A driver with nothing to lose is no longer managing the season the same way. He is not protecting a comfortable position. He is not calculating like a man with the championship lead. He is chasing. And chasing changes everything. It changes how late you brake. It changes how much space you leave. It changes how quickly you question a call. It changes how much risk feels acceptable. For Mercedes, that is terrifying, because the driver Russell is chasing is not in another team. He is on the other side of the garage. Kimi Antonelli now has to deal with a teammate who feels wronged, fast, and free from the pressure that once made him cautious. And Antonelli is not going to simply move aside. He has earned his lead. He has earned his belief. He has no reason to surrender control of the championship narrative just because Russell feels unlucky. That means the internal fight is not calming down. It is becoming more dangerous. Canada already showed how close the line can get. The sprint contact. The radio anger. The public intervention from Wolff. The main race position debate. The failure. The investigation. The reprimand. Each piece matters. Together, they create a garage that is no longer only chasing titles. It is managing a fracture. And fractures are dangerous because they do not always break immediately. Sometimes they spread quietly. A small crack under pressure becomes a larger crack the next time the force hits the same place. Mercedes is now that structure. Fast, powerful, impressive, but carrying stress in the one area that can destroy even the strongest team. The relationship between its drivers. Russell's anger is not only about the car. It is about what the car failure allowed to happen. It allowed Antonelli to win. It allowed the gap to grow. It allowed the story to move further away from him. It allowed the world to talk about his frustration instead of his performance. That is the part that may fuel him most. Because before the failure, Canada was Russell's answer. After the failure, Canada became Antonelli's victory. That kind of reversal can stay with a driver for a long time. And now Mercedes must ask the question no team wants to ask.